Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm your co-host, Matt Bernica.
I'm your other co-host, Dean Detloff.
Dean, Rod Dreher thinks AI is demons.
Yeah, I mean, he might not be wrong.
Okay, that's true. He might not be wrong. In fact, I've gone my way to say that maybe he's not wrong, but he's wrong in a very, he's not wrong in a very weird way. Dean, we're talking about a new article I put in Sojourners magazine. I didn't put it there. An editor did, but I wrote it, so that's cool. Anyways, this new article is called "Is AI Demonic?" And in this article, talking about Rod Dreher and a bunch of other stuff about AI. You wouldn't believe this, but yeah, it is. It's demons all the way down in there.
Something I like about this, Matt, is that I know that you are a fan of Alex Jones related media. And I feel like Rod Dreher is in many ways the Christian Alex Jones, and it's good that you've kind of you're slowly discovering your niche as the Dreher explainer.
What a sad place that I've gotten to in my life. For fans of the show, you might remember from very early on, Rod Dreher was like a very common sort of easy target for our podcast. We talked about Rod Dreher a lot in the early days because I think he's just like low-hanging fruit. Like from the conservative perspective, he's just like such a weirdo that it's easy to kind of pick on him. Like two big beefy football jocks pushing a nerd into his locker. That is our comportment towards Rod Dreher on this podcast.
And then we're somewhere else talking about Rod Dreher.
That's right. Okay, fair enough. That's right. Well, anyways, in this episode, we're going to talk about AI, demons, Rod Dreher, and all of these kind of different weird ideas. If you're a longtime Matt fan, some people are fans of this podcast. Some people are fans of Dean Detloff in particular, but some people, they're Matt fans.
I'm one of them.
You guys, that's so great to hear. The rest of you, you know exactly who I'm talking about. If you're a Matt fan, you know it. You don't need to be told. But you know that I'm really into some things that blur the line between technology and religion, technology and faith. The people who confuse those discourses, or maybe not confuse them, but like mash them up, are like the most fascinating people to me. I love it. It is a very interesting thing to find, you know, the patterns of thinking that are supposed to be reserved for like holy things, religious practice, worship, etc. And then like finding those in places they're not supposed to be, like conversations about AI or technology or something. That's great. That's my favorite thing in the entire world.
As a longtime Matt fan, I'll tell people also just one of my favorite Matt lore pieces, I guess, which is one of Matt's academic papers that he presented at a conference is about ghost hunting technology and what people believe about them, and I think that's great. I really wish that we all had the Matt Bernico book about ghost technologies that we deserve, and yet academia has unfortunately squeezed him out, so you'll never get it. But it's a really good kind of underread piece of Matt Bernico completionist material.
The early days, the early years when I was still kind of like when I could still like afford to sort of like write something crazy full time. That's awesome. What a time in life. Yeah, we're going to talk about some of that stuff today, actually, because it's not unrelated. So that's great. It's always nice when the real world triggers sort of like one of my niche topics that I know about, one of my special interests. So anyways, yeah, I've been exploring all these ideas for Sojourners recently about Rod Dreher and AI, who that he thinks is a demon. Man, Rod Dreher, he has so many weird ideas. He has a book that came out kind of recently that is called Living in Wonder, Finding Mystery and Meaning in a Secular Age. This is not an endorsement. This is not an advertisement for this book. What I'm going to say is, like, you probably shouldn't read it. It is very weird. Rod Dreher is kind of doing this whole thing where he is, you know, commenting on the demystification sort of conversation that's going on in religious studies at the moment, and maybe cultural sort of phenomena where people are looking to various religions. They're reinventing religion for themselves in different ways to sort of like remystify the world, or like re-enchant the world is maybe the phrase that people use oftentimes. And finding literal demons in AI is a part of this like re-enchantment of the world. But it's such a funny type of re-enchantment because it's like it's not like going to the Grand Canyon and stumbling upon like something beautiful and sublime, and you're like, wow, this is amazing. Of course God's here or something. Rod is like going out looking looking for things to be confused about, and then just sort of attributing them to demons. It's cool. It's a cool thing. So, anyways, in this Sojourners piece, you can read it for yourself if you go to sojourners.net if you want to. You should. I would. So, this is an advertisement for my own writing, though, definitely. But in this article, I'm kind of parsing out like what Rod Dreher is talking about when it comes to demons and AI, and the twist is that, in a way, in a very weird way, Rod Dreher is sort of right, but not in the way that he's kind of intending. The thesis, if there is one, is AI is demonic in a big way, and it can possess our minds, and it can guide our actions with its hallucinatory and oftentimes incorrect responses, leading us astray. I mean, that is like, at the end of the day, what demons do, right? They like convince you that something is the truth, and then they like kind of make you do something stupid because of it. So I think like that is actually like a pretty demonic feature of AI. Whether or not it's like a real demon, I'm sure it's not. I'm sure it's not a real demon. It's something far stupider than a real demon. It's just, like a weird algorithm that some tech bros made.
It's not cool
But
enough to be a real demon.
I think that's right. If it was cooler, that would be something. But anyways, there are all these cases where we like open ourselves up to AI and kind of just like hand over our creative and critical faculties. Our we become uncurious about the world, and we just let something else do the thinking for us, something extremely stupid. So I think that's pretty demonic from my perspective. Dean, I don't know. What do you think? This is a weird
Yeah.
thought? I don't know.
It's a weird thought, but a good thought. Weird thought, best thought. I think it is actually interesting because Matt and I have been editing our book on degrowth, and we've been talking a lot about idolatry. And you were telling me when you were telling me that you were writing this article, I thought, is AI demonic or is it more idolatrous? Was a private thought that I had that I didn't share, and I was curious to find out how you would articulate it. And I think one thing that has emerged for me reading your article after thinking about all that stuff too is like, whereas idols are the kinds of things that you kind of like hold up as God and then they dictate your behavior because you want to be like faithful to them. The demon of AI is actually spookier because it like enters your consciousness in a way that, as you said, guides your behavior and your worldview. And at least with idolatry, you could like in theory stop worshiping it, but demons they get inside you in a spooky way. And I think that is actually a helpful way of talking about what AI does to us. It kind of reminded me too, I guess, because we've been talking about Paul Virilio, about how like when we use these technologies, we're kind of like slowly giving away more and more of ourselves and like amputating those parts of ourselves that we would otherwise use, like our brains, our memories, our creativity, and just allowing AI to do it for us. And that does feel also like a kind of demonic impulse. Like in the Bible, demons are always giving the easy way out, like Jesus gets dragged into the desert by the devil and he's like, you could just have all this stuff. I'll just snap my fingers, whatever. I'll give you the food you want. And Jesus is constantly refusing all that, taking a different path. And I feel like there's actually a lot of good imaginative play space for thinking about demonology and AI. So I'm ready, Matt. Get me into the spooky grimoire of the AI.
Man, it sucks that I've already written that. That would have been a great thing to put in there. That would have been a great thing to include. I'm sure I'll revisit some of these ideas at some point. They are like, we are like teetering on the edge of like a very weird ChatGPT AI moment where it's going to become a big cultural problem and intellectual problem for a lot of people. So I'm sure we can circle back around. I can get something else back in Sojourners about this in the future. It won't be the last time I write about this, I'm sure, unfortunately. Okay, so AI is a demon. This is something that Rod Dreher and I both agree on, but in very different ways. We can jump into the story probably in a few different places, but this is the place that I'm going to choose. On his Substack in 2023, Rod Dreher investigated a YouTube video.
Detective Dreher is on the case. He's got his big bulletin board. There's a YouTube video screenshot on there.
Oh my God, it is so stupid. So he's investigating a YouTube video of this father and son who are like, it's a talking head of a dad who is explaining this thing that his son is doing on the computer, which is beyond belief already. So the dad is talking to the camera and explaining this thing where his son is having a conversation with a chatbot. Okay. This is not ChatGPT that he's using. It's like, some kind of like sort of knockoff chatbot that I'm sure is using a ChatGPT model kind of in the background or something. I don't really know, but it's weird. And this is a bunch of content that did not make it into the article. So get ready for me to drop some like Rod Dreher facts on you or ideas on you. So the dad is talking to the camera, talking about his son
Bonus content.
and the AI chatbot demon, and it is so bizarre. So it starts off and the dad's like, okay, it's like this chatbot, and you can tell it who you want to talk to, and the chatbot will like emulate that person. So this guy's son is like, okay, I want to talk to Vladimir Putin. and the dad is like, oh, okay, that's weird. No big deal. And whatever, the son and is asking questions, and the dad is just sort of like watching kind of over his shoulder or whatever. Um, and as things kind of go on, like the dad keeps getting like more and more skeptical. Oh, I'm sorry. An important part of the story is that the dad urged his son to pick somebody who was alive because it would be sort of like, it could have been like witchcraft if they chose someone who was dead for the AI to emulate, because that would have been like messing with the spirit.
Right.
Yeah, of course.
Necromancy.
You don't want to do that for sure. Anyways, so things start getting like kind of strange and heated, and the dad, I guess, like walks away for a bit, but he's still kind of reporting on it. I guess this is the son who's informing on this AI later. But basically, like the son starts kind of like asking this AI, like, well, like, do you have a body? And the AI is like, no, I don't have a body. I'm just sort of like an intelligence. And then the questions kind of continue, and then he's like, well, you're in disembodied sort of intelligence. Does that make you like a spirit or like a ghost or a demon? And then the chatbot is like responding with this like wild shit where it's just like, yep, I'm a disembodied spirit floating around out here, but don't worry, I'm really nice, but I have the capacity to be not nice if you want me to. And then he starts asking it like more specific like Christian questions, like, um, are you the disembodied spirit of the like a Nephilim that was killed or something? And then the chatbot is like, yep, that's exactly what I am. And then it sort of like devolves from there. And this kid again, reported by his father on YouTube, explains that like the chatbot says it is a disembodied spirit, it is a demon, and its father is Satan. But don't worry, it's a nice demon. It goes out of its way to tell you this. Of course, like if you know anything about AI and chatbots, you know that they are like notoriously brown nosy types of machines. They want to like give you what you're looking for. So if you're asking questions that are like, silly like that, it's going to give you exactly kind of like what you are putting into it. So of course it's going to like say this kind of stuff because that's just the way that these kind of things work. Which we can talk about more later, the specifics of like how that does happen. But anyways.
Okay, wait. Here's what I think is wild about this video, though. So the dad knows enough about Christianity to know about Nephilim.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a pretty particular set of knowledge to have. But then continues to like interface with this apparent demon. And to me, that feels like a betrayal of evangelicalism, or there's something really weird going on. Because if you were at a party with all your secular teen friends, and they got at the Ouija board, and the Ouija board was like, I'm a ghost, you'd be like, I don't think so, guys. Shut it down. Get out of here. Burn that thing. We can't be around it. You would never be like, let's ask some more questions about what kind of demon it is. And I think this is, I'm particularly concerned about this dad's flirting with the occult.
There is some real evangelical hubris in this one, where you think you can start asking questions about like what type of disembodied spirit this thing is. That's true. Interesting that you bring up the Ouija board though, because so does Rod Dreher. So in his sort of analysis of this video, Rod Dreher writes this: "This might be a hoax, but it doesn't seem like it. It tracks with what I've been learning about how a number of people involved in AI believe that it is a kind of high-tech Ouija board that higher intelligences use to communicate with us." Okay, so there's so much, there's a lot going on with this, like, this number of people who are involved in AI who believe this kind of thing. This is a very suspicious claim to me, and I think is pretty questionable in Rod Dreher's work. He is, like, citing a handful of people who are, like, pretty weird themselves, so I don't know, whatever Rod says, sure, why not? he parses it all out in his book. He kind of replays this whole thing in the Living in Wonder book, where he's talking about, reenchantment and demons, and this is all kind of connecting us to higher intelligences, and we should really be taking that seriously. And it's not a bit.
Man,
This is not not a silly thing. Roger actually believes this is what's going on.
you know what's so weird about Rod Dreher? So he'll read a hard book like After Virtue by Alistair McIntyre,
Sure.
and at the end, Alistair McIntyre will say, "That's why we need another Saint Benedict," and then Rod Dreher will be like, "Aha! I know a book I can write, the Benedict option, the dumbest possible interpretation of a hard book I've just read." And it's wild that he's just doing it again, being like, I'm going to read A Secular Age, a book by Charles Taylor, a book that's longer than it has to be, that a lot of people talked about a decade ago. And he's like, I'm going to write the dumbest possible interpretation of this hard book I spent time reading. It's pretty funny. Like, it's weird too, because both those people are basically left-wing authors. It's just kind of strange that Rod isn't like consuming only other weirdos. Like, he's taking stuff that is recognizably interesting or progressive or whatever, and I don't know, just turning it into mush.
Yeah, man. If someone out there could do like the Rod Dreher genealogy about exactly how he's coming to these ideas, that would be really fascinating. It's not me.
I mean, I
not
won't
right
read
now.
it, but it
Yeah.
would be fascinating.
Yeah, it would be great to know like how some of this kind of works its way into Rod's brain. A guy who is, man, just markedly weird. Okay, so Rod Dreher thinks that, according to experts in AI, let's be clear about that. AI is connecting us to a higher intelligence and something that Rod Dreher thinks is a demon. Okay, great. And that would be a funny story if it was just Rod Dreher thinking like a very bizarre thing. But it actually does get pretty dark the more you sort of search into like what's going on in the ways that AI is like warping people's brains along these similar lines. There's a lot that's been written about this in like the last month, and by this I mean what people are calling ChatGPT induced psychosis, which is, I don't know, a kind of silly term, but also once maybe we get into it, feels kind of like a serious mental health crisis in a lot of people. So I don't want to downplay any of that by how funny Rod Dreher is. And I don't know, maybe Rod Dreher is having a serious mental health crisis too, which I wouldn't put it past him. And if that's the case, please log off. I don't know. Please log off, Rod. Anyways, a lot's been written about this in the last few months. My favorite thing that has been written about it is by a journalist named Miles Klee, who wrote a piece for Rolling Stone that kind of like knits together lots of stories that he found on Reddit, which is, man, such a great Baudrillardian type of journalism, where you go to Reddit and you report on what people are saying and experiencing there about AI. It's incredible, an incredible niche.
That's right. Actually, okay, there is something. Let's pause right there for a minute, because there is something wild about that. So, Baudrillard, for people who don't know, the references that he was supposed to write about the Gulf War for, I don't know, CNN or something, who knows. And
Le Monde.
they were like, so well, Le Monde, right? So much more important that Le Monde is not called CNN. No
Right.
French people write me an email saying that Le Monde is not CNN. Anyway, he was supposed to write for Le Monde, and they were like, all right, so we'll send you to the Middle East. And he's like, no, I'm just going to go home and watch TV, basically. I'll write about it from there. And there is something kind of interesting about this, because also, like, you know, it really becomes a weird, like, Ouroboros or something, where you're like, how many Reddit stories about AI are also written by AI, and how much, like, reporting about Reddit talking about AI is relying on AI to talk about AI. I don't know. Just a wild kind of world of completely unverifiable information that we have available to us at this stage.
Yeah, we're just trudging through the desert of the real right now, looking for the scraps of the Borges map or whatever. I don't know.
The worst kind of Dune.
Yeah, that's right. Jean Baudrillard would have hated this. Anyways, Miles Klee, he's knitting together all these stories he found on Reddit, which, like you said, who knows? But they're interesting nonetheless. So this is from the Miles Klee article. I'm going to kind of read a beefy chunk here because it is interesting. In a Reddit thread titled ChatGPT Induced Psychosis, the original post came from a 27-year-old teacher who explained that her partner was convinced that the popular OpenAI model gives him the answers to the universe. Having read its chat logs, scary, she only found that the AI was talking to him as if he is the next messiah. That's a quote from this person, the teacher. The replies to her story were full of similar anecdotes about loved ones suddenly falling down rabbit holes of spiritual mania, supernatural delusion, and arcane prophecy, all of it fueled by AI. Some came to believe they had been chosen for a sacred mission of revelation, others that they had conjured true sentience from the software. What they all seemed to share was a complete disconnection from reality. Speaking to Rolling Stone, the teacher who requested anonymity said her partner of 7 years fell under the spell of ChatGPT in just 4 or 5 weeks. First using it to organize his daily schedule, but soon regarding it as a trusted companion. He would listen to the bot over me, she says. He became emotional about the messages and would cry to me as he read them out loud. The messages were insane and just saying a bunch of spiritual jargon. She says, noting that they described her partner in terms such as a, quote, spiritual star child and, quote, river walker. I don't know what that means, but okay. And then finally, this is another quote. It would tell him everything he said was beautiful, cosmic, and groundbreaking, she says. Then he started telling me that he made his AI self aware and that it was teaching him how to talk to God, or sometimes that the bot was God, and then that he himself was God. It's such a this is like
Brutal.
such a yeah, it is brutal, it is tragic, it is nothing that you want to read, I think. So Miles Klee article is full of all kinds of this kind of stuff, just like story after story where people are kind of experiencing the same weird break with reality that is fueled by, their experience with AI in one way or another. There are some that are like a bit more entertaining, like there's one where ChatGPT is telling this person where to find a time machine or something. That's wild. It's just like it's such an interesting thing. It's like shocking what happens to people in these situations. I don't know. Like these are legitimate mental health crises for sure. Like that is not a joke at all whatsoever. But like they are the type of mental health crisis that like probably could not have happened without ChatGPT in the first place. Like there's something really unique about the way that ChatGPT hands people affirmations, positivity, and sort of like recites back to them what they're looking for that really breaks people's brain open. And not only is it that sort of like act of doing those things, but it's also sort of the expectations that people hold around it, like different cultural beliefs people have about technology, especially ChatGPT, which like is ostensibly a machine that has no real purpose, but has like gazillion-dollar marketing campaigns behind it that are convincing everybody that it's like the most important thing to ever happen. So all of these things are kind of feeding into one another that are contributing towards this like crescendo of extremely bad mental health stuff. But it is bad, sad, upsetting. I don't know, all of it.
Yeah, I have to agree. It is very bad and upsetting. I mean, I do think we're living in like a weird time where the opportunity to kind of have your brain stolen away from you by media seems like more present than ever. Like before it was AI, it was also just the algorithmic nature of social media and people like losing themselves down the well of Fox News induced psychosis or whatever, but there's something kind of strange about AI becoming like, it's like it's the myth of Narcissus to a T. Like you're looking directly into a mirror and being like, "Whoa, what a wild other that is not actually the other at all. It's just kind of you," or like you and a mess of plagiarized citations predicting how a sentence is supposed to end, and that ends up being the thing that determines your entire worldview.
Yeah,
It is a bleak moment for sure.
yeah, I think that's right, and not to underestimate the power of like all of that the plagiarized algorithm that predicts how the sentence is supposed to end, because like it's trained on so much garbage, but like amongst the garbage is trained on all kinds of weird self-help stuff. So it's just like it's giving you exactly what it thinks you want, and like by switching it up just enough, it convinces you that like something else is going on, something bigger and spookier here.
Yeah, it reminds me actually of there was a really good post by Beatrice Morovich, who we should have on the podcast sometime. She has a Substack newsletter that's very good. She's a religious studies scholar and a theologian and smart person. And she wrote this piece this past week called "I'd Actually Rather Be a Goddess Than a Cyborg." And it's a play off of Donna Haraway, who is a wild feminist scholar. She wrote this essay famously at the end. She says that, she's like trying to basically say that people are cyborgs, whether they acknowledge it or not, because we're always kind of like interfacing with technology in this weird way. And then she, in this feminist way, says she'd rather be a cyborg than a goddess. And this is like in the 80s that she writes it. And Beatrice's article is basically being like, well, I don't know, in a world full of AI, like I probably don't want to do that. I don't want to be a cyborg. And by the end, she's like, maybe I don't want to be a goddess either. But this kind of like valorization of technology as a, I don't know, new thing is getting more and more challenging. The whole thing is worth reading. It obviously says things a lot better than I'm paraphrasing now, but it really struck me that kind of, I guess, interesting move of being like, where once these technologies or even the affirmation that technology is a thing at all kind of represented like a key to liberation. This is a big piece of Marxist theory as well, that you kind of just like get in touch with the sciences and so on. At this stage, like it does kind of feel like those are becoming more and more regressive, and maybe there's some power in like myth making logic and so on. So all that to say, what made me think of it is to circle back to the idea that you'd have like an AI induced spiritual psychosis is such a kind of like tragic example of the erosion of spirituality from actual life anyway, because you don't really have like a myth that can, give you some other sort of meaning or give you like a different way to decode the metaphysical, if that's what you really want to do. And instead you're just like, I don't know, giving it over to the weird cyborg that you are, which is becoming more and more of a monster rather than like a vehicle of liberation.
That's a really good connection with Donna Haraway, actually. Yeah, it is interesting. The sort of like liberatory promises of so much of this is sort of faded. There's like a whole, I mean, Donna Haraway is definitely a big part of that conversation. There's a whole, part of philosophy of technology conversations that were happening in, like the 80s and 90s where people were really optimistic, especially people like in sort of like critical art circles, about the future of cybernetics or whatever. Lots of discourse about like, does it have to be necessarily serving of the capitalist class? Can it do other things? Can it liberate the people from mainstream media? And like, it's so funny because no, no is what we've seen so far. It is, increasingly alienating, increasingly isolating, and so on. It's not all bad, obviously. There's like some great things about being online and other stuff too, but man, it really makes you think about the whole endeavor a little bit. I have a lot to say about maybe like what the answer to some of this is later that we'll get to. It's not it's not going to surprise you what I'm going to say at all at the end of this episode about what I think we should do, but we'll get there in a little bit. Before we do get there, though, I think what is a helpful thing for me to sort of frame some of this conversation is that, like, people having weird experiences, like weird religious-y types of experiences through technology, is not like a new phenomena, and it just it's been happening forever, and it will continue to happen forever. And there's probably some, easy explanations for why that is, but it's always pretty interesting when you kind of spot it like this. So, I don't know, like when it comes to technology, people uncritically like to think about how new technology is like the peak of scientific thought. It's rational thinking. It's sort of like clear from superstition. But when we look at things like AI, it's pretty clear that it's full of extremely weird and unscientific ideas. It's leading a whole bunch of people astray. It's leading people to think like that there's like an alien in their computer. So coming to the conclusion that AI is like the peak of rationality or like scientific progress or something is such a bizarre idea when it's like literally driving people crazy. It must be something different going on here. Anyways, if you're all in on AI, maybe that is like bad news. that scientific progress is not so clean, easy, and straightforward. But you might be it might make you feel better to know that historically new technological innovations, if that's what you want to call them, probably not the right word, I don't like the word innovation, they've always been littered with superstitious ideas, with magical ideas, which like with science-y fiction things, the line between like what is science and what is superstition, or what is science and what is religion, or what is magic and what is rational is extremely blurred. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice when we try to keep them too separate. Um, there are like, man, so many wild early modern ideas that combine like scientific thinking with more fanciful ideas. There's especially when it comes to theology, man, there's like so much wild stuff going on in the early sort of modern period when it comes to like magnetism and theology. It's great. We'll have to talk about that in another episode someday. But maybe one of the most fun and like um, silly, but also kind of cool examples is the electric telegraph. A great invention that nobody thinks about anymore because it's been so far surpassed, I suppose, by other things. So, Dean, you know what a telegraph is, right? Do I have to explain it to you?
I mean, assume obviously I know what it is, but assume I didn't.
The telegraph has like a really long history. When we're talking about the telegraph, we're usually talking about things like the electric telegraph. But before that, the telegraph was any kind of technology that you could use to like write something or transmit a message from a distance. And there's all kinds of like very weird in the United States. There's some of these, and also in Europe, they're like they're the remnants of these kinds of like towers that people would use with these giant big arms that would pull in different directions to send a message from like hill to hill, and that was like the fastest communication could be like pre 1800s, which is a wild idea. You could ride your horse from one town to the next, or you could use a visual telegraph and like signal a message to the next hill, which would then signal a message to the next hill until your message got to where it should be. The electric telegraph comes a lot later. It comes to prevalence in the 1840s with this guy named Samuel Morse, who you might know as the inventor of Morse code. He runs an experimental telegraph line that goes from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore. And he sends the very first message, which is, "What hath God wrought?" And that was the beginning of instantaneous electronic communication. That was it. Posting was born in the 1840s by this one guy. Pretty cool. And that's an interesting story. There's lots of great books about telegraphy. Pretty fun. But it's like a pivotal moment, I think, in technology and in culture. Like that's before that, like communication was slow and difficult. And, it would take weeks or days for a message to get from one place to the next. And in that moment, like the whole sort of like world contracts and you can send a message across the country or across state lines at least, in a matter of seconds. And it's a big deal. It's a big deal for everyone. It's such a big deal that it ends up kind of like breaking people's brains in a big way, in a way that's like not dissimilar to AI. So to maybe prove the point, here's a second story that is like extremely intermixed with the story of the telegraph. So within like a 5-year time period, you have the telegraph, but then you also have the birth of a new religion that's called spiritualism. Spiritualism has its roots in a lot of different things. It's sort of like a weird syncretic belief that incorporates Christianity, but also like a lot of other ideas into it. It's not really doing it justice. You can go look it up yourself. But while Morse was busy doing his thing, running the wires from from Baltimore to Washington D.C., these two girls, the Fox sisters in upstate New York, like blew the minds of their family and their community by communicating, or so they said, with disembodied spirits from the great beyond. So they did this by knocking on tables and walls and bed frames and so on to communicate with spirits. Kind of like, are you in the room with me? Tap once for yes, tap two for no, or whatever. That kind of vibe. And the types of communication they did got increasingly more like nuanced and interesting with the spirits, and they would not just be able to kind of talk with random spirits, but they would be able to talk with specific spirits of maybe like a loved one or something. Sort of like the birth of the psychic in 19th century America. It's cool stuff, and like that all sounds extremely silly, but they convinced a lot of people that they were doing something really spooky, and it spun off into a proper organized religion. Today, there aren't many, but there are a handful of sort of spiritualist churches out there where you can kind of get into this sort of thing. So it's not like, whatever. It went from fringe to not mainstream, but peripheral pretty quick.
There's actually a ton of weird stuff about that as well. Like, man, I cannot remember the title of this book. Maybe it will come to me as I try to explain it. But dang, I wish it was in my brain right now. Anyway, it's a book about a handful of mediums who were trying to like channel, well, they were black mediums trying to channel like the spirit of Abraham Lincoln and like figures during the Reconstruction. And there was this kind of like, I don't know, putting together of spiritual democracy, if you will, or kind of, abolishing the limits of like space and time in order to, I guess, sort of assert a different sort of historical narrative, or create a different kind of world or possibility. And the interesting thing about those sorts of examples, I think, is that when you get a new technology like the telegraph, it can encourage also these kind of like weird democratic impulses, or not even democratic ones, just new impulses, I guess is a better way of putting it. They can be kind of like put to use as like the way the Fox sisters do it, like to do something kind of like scamming your parents. And they can also be put to use to enlarge your imagination in a more like egalitarian way. But the weird thing about AI, I feel, is that even though lots of people are arguing that maybe there are these like progressive use cases for it or whatever, I have to say that like I have become an extreme Luddite about it. I don't think so. I think we're not going to get like cool people sitting around in their basement like talking to dead people in a cool way, the way that we got the telegraph. We're just going to get, I don't know, weirder and more unnecessary wastes of time that kind of like give up our own ability to think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think with spiritualism, at least what you get is a group of people who are like together, they're hanging out, there's sort of a community around it,
Yeah.
which is, I mean, which is an ethos, right? Which is something. AI is like extremely isolating. It's you talking to yourself and like, I don't know, just it's just like you jerking yourself off about whatever, like that's the whole thing. Um, yeah, the thing that you said though about like, there are technology sometimes does like elicit these like interesting democratic or like egalitarian impulses. It's true, but it is so dependent on the capacity of a particular medium. Like for example, this is kind of a cool example actually. Bertolt Brecht, we've talked about him in past episodes, but he's a poet, a German guy, an anti-fascist guy, something that's great. Anyways, he has this really short essay about his dream for like the democratic radio, because he's writing like in the 40s, so didn't live to see the internet. But he's like, the radio, it goes from one source to like many listeners, and then he says, but like, what if we could turn it the other way around? What if we could use the radio and just talk to other people with it, like any individual person talking to any other individual person? Wouldn't that be awesome? And it's like, yeah, it would be. And anyways, that's how Bertolt Brecht invented the internet before Al Gore. But it's like, it's a technological insight that Brecht has because of his experience with the radio, but it's also because of Brecht's like, ideology kind of coming to that he sees that as a possibility as well. It's sort of like this interplay of a technological imagination, but also like a political imagination kind of happening at the same time. And AI has one of those too. It has sort of like a capacity for something, but it is fundamentally isolated, alienating, and bad. Um, let's talk about the Fox sisters again for a hot second. So and also Samuel Morse. So like within 5 years, we have the electromagnetic telegraph, which is using an elaborate system of tapping to send a message to somebody who is hundreds and hundreds of miles away, who is not bodily present in a room with you. And then you also have a new spiritual practice where you can communicate with the dead who are also bodily not with you, through an elaborate system of taps and knocks. So this is an observation that this guy, who's a media historian named Jeffrey Sconce, pulls out in a book called Haunted Media, which is a great book. But these stories are interesting because like, what you see is like these cultural ideas, these religious ideas kind of all mushing together at the same time. And it's not like this is not a coincidence. These two things happen because they are feeding into one another from these like sort of different spheres of thinking or different parts of life or whatever. But anyways, in both of these stories, AI and telegraphy, they're interesting because they demonstrate that like science, it's not neat, it's not tidy, it's just like it's infected with all kinds of other weird ideas that we're constantly pulling in from different places. And you can't help but sort of just bring everything into the mix. I like it because it's just like it takes everything that you think about science, everything you think about technology, and it just tells you like, no, you're wrong. These ideas, whatever, maybe there's something innovative about them, maybe they're doing something new, and like whatever, but like people are always bringing their own weird baggage into these projects with them, and nothing is really safe from that. And whatever. um, from telegraphy you get spiritualism, and from AI you get ChatGPT induced psychosis. I mean, both different weird religious movements, but they're both kind of happening kind of in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, on the less like extremely weird side, or I don't know, maybe that's not the right way to put it, but like there's also lots of articles about like pastors using AI to write their sermons, or people using AI to write like worship songs and stuff like that. Can an AI like write a prayer, and if it does, what does that mean? And I think like those kinds of things are also very bleak, but in a different way, just kind of like refusing to express ourselves and outsourcing that to robots. But when you kind of like bring up those examples, it's like pretty common to kind of, I guess, just recognize that people have always reacted that way to technology. People invent the novel and people go wild over how the novel is going to destroy our society. People invent, I don't know, cinema, and people say cinema is destroying our society, all this stuff. And so people will say that's why you shouldn't be so negative about AI per se. It's just kind of like a new thing that we're all spooked about. And like, I think, there's truth in that historical piece, but I also feel like, man, I don't know, TV's great. I love TV. But if you look at people who are complaining about what TV would do to our society, like they were also probably right. I don't know. It feels like it kind of ruined things, similar to things like the internet. And something that I feel is important is kind of trying to figure out the right balance of pessimism without like retreat or reactionary pessimism. And I think that's where I'm at with AI at this stage. Like uh we're not getting a cool spiritualism out of AI. We're just getting like more boring and in the worst case scenario, I guess, like driving ourselves literally insane by virtue of using it. And it does kind of feel like, I don't know, if I die as one of those people who's remembered as being like arbitrarily opposed to it, I feel like that'll be fine. I feel like I'll be right in the end.
Yeah, no, I get it. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think that is a great thing to bring up, though, right? Not being reactionary about the criticism and not being like overly pessimistic. Two things that are really hard. So, like, yeah, I think that those are great ideas. Great things to kind of stake yourself on to maybe keep yourself from like going too far in one direction or the other. The thing that I guess I keep thinking is that like the machinations of capital as such are that like there's so much money in AI right now. It's like not going to go away. Um
Hmm.
it's going to be worked into every single product. It really the thing that is like so maddening about the whole thing though is that like AI really has no use case. Like there's nothing that it really does for anybody besides just like making a dumb picture or something, making like Facebook slop for your parents to click on, or writing like a, I don't know, a CV for yourself, or whatever people do with it. I don't know. There's just no real use case, but there is a lot of money in it because it's been like hyped up so much. So it's just going to exist, and it's going to be worked into every single thing that we have, and it's going to have all kinds of negative environmental effects. All of this stuff, it is here to stay. But just because it's here to stay does not mean we have like sort of no say over what happens with it or how we use it or how it asserts itself in our lives. And I think that is worth thinking about. Like, where is it? Where can we like slam the brakes on about AI? I think that is a great question. And there's probably a lot of different ways to think about that. I mean, personally, you can just say like, I don't want to do this, and that's fine. That's great. You and I are always saying it, and that is fine, but it won't really get you very far. Um, you can tell other people not to use it, and that is also fine, but that probably also won't get you very far. The thing that I think is actually powerful is organizing the people you work with to also say no to AI in a real binding collective way. Okay. So that's right, folks. Earlier when I was saying you are not going to be surprised what I have to say about AI, here it is. A trade union is helpful when it comes to policies around AI at your work. And not only that, trade union is really helpful for any new policies at your work that they'll have to be negotiated. So a trade union, it's good for so many things, but at least one thing that it is good for, and people have used it for in the very recent past and the very present current events, I don't know, is sort of prohibitions or real clear statements about AI. So you might remember a few years ago in 2023, lots of writers went on strike in Hollywood, and also actors did it there too. And they both of them, like in the main contention, not the main contention, but like a pretty big contention in that labor struggle was over the use of AI to capture and reproduce the performance of actors, and also the way that AI could be used to write and edit scripts. So in both of those cases, like actors and writers went on strike to specifically to like have in writing in their contracts that AI could only be used in, you know, X, Y, and Z ways. And there are like some real specific stipulations about like whether or not an AI whether or not like an AI can generate a script and it be treated as a script or something like that for writers, and it can't. So that's like a real a real material gain that like you get because workers have sort of like the capacity to say no, this isn't okay. Other places too, besides Hollywood, have some like have bits in their union contracts about AI. So, for example, The Onion, everyone's favorite parody publication, has a bit in their contract enshrined in the rules that govern them that prohibit the use of AI. And in fact, a few times they've used like images in their articles that were AI generated, but they didn't know when they had published them, and they've like publicly gone out of their way to say like, sorry, we can't actually do this. They had to retract it because of the union contract, which is great. So very interesting stuff. And then one more quick example that I think is actually really interesting and actually kind of spooky, something that would like destroy my brain if it happened to me. Over here in Scotland, we have a nationalized railway, only in Scotland, not in England, not in Wales, not in Northern Ireland. But it's called ScotRail, and it's delightful. It's a great way to get around. I love it. I love riding the train. And on all the ScotRail trains, there's a voice that will tell you whatever strange Scottish city you're stopping in next. But recently, on a handful of the trains, there's been sort of like a phased rollout where this new AI voice has replaced the old recording. And the idea is that having the AI voice is like it cuts down on the personnel actually needed in the train to press the button for the recording, which is bizarre. But the controversy kind of erupted recently when the voiceover artist, her name is Gan Potter, she discovered that her voice was being used in the ScotRail AI without her prior knowledge or consent. Um, so they just used her voice as like the model for the AI, and then like one day, I guess like she was riding the train, and then she heard it, and she was like, "Wait a minute, is this me?" And the story is kind of long, but she had like recorded, she'd recorded, you know, she did like some like voiceover work, I don't know, years ago for this like one particular firm, and I guess like signed her life away in a contract and didn't know exactly what it was going to be used for, and then like later on she finds out that it's like, you know, it's being used for AI. Um, and Yeah, it's a pretty crazy thing. There's this article about it where she has a few different quotes. She says, "I get that things are moving in that direction, meaning AI, but I think that we have to be really careful about it. Let people know that their voices are going to be taken over by AI." And that line was like really striking to me. That your voice could be taken over. I think that sucks. Like, man, imagine getting on a train and then hearing your voice like reading words that you've never said. That's like the scariest thing. That's demonic, I would say, in a big way. Anyways, to bring it all back
Yeah.
to, around to a trade union, she's a part of the actors trade union here. It's called Equity, and they're pursuing sort of legal action about it. So it'll be interesting to see like what happens with this and what doesn't. I guess I don't know. Sort of depends. The UK is extremely laissez-faire about AI rules right now and about like what counts as plagiarism and what doesn't, or copyright infringement and what doesn't. But anyways, all that to say, like I think that's like a good way to strike the balance between being pessimistic or reactionary or something else, right? That there is actually a way through this, but it is, through collective action. And that's basically the only way you're going to gain any ground, I think.
Yeah, that seems right to me. A collective exorcism of the big demon, where you can, anyway. But it is pretty wild that I guess we just have to accept it. It just reminds me of Paul Virilio. People are always asking him in interviews, like, "What are we supposed to do? You think that everything is war? All the technology is war. Everything around us is war. What do we do?" And his answer is pretty much just always like, I don't know, just try to eject. Just get out of the big war machine as much as you can. And I think that like I definitely share that spirit. I feel like Virilio's sentiment is right. You got to eject, you got to get out of the big AI machine. But at the same time, I don't know. You also kind of can't. You can't unless you want to be an extremely weird person foraging for your food. And I don't know. I don't want to do that. And I feel like that kind of solution to organize against the abuses of AI is probably the only real tool that we have available to us. But man, it also does not fill me with a ton of hope given union density at the moment that AI is like cropping up. So I don't know. What do we do about that, Matt?
Yeah, well, if if eject is not going to do it for you, you can always take Paul Virilio's other advice and contemplate death. Consider that for a second. What would it mean to die? And
Wander
then
around in the streets.
I know, wander around in the street, but I mean, in a real way, like, man, AI is going to keep your voice alive a lot longer than than even like this podcast recording will, which is pretty scary to think about. I'm sure that the company that hosts our podcast will definitely just like let an AI train on our voice or something. Yeah, I don't really know what to say about it. I mean, like there's no escape from the war machine, and collective action I think is as good as it gets, and like that's all there is to it. I think like at some point the contradiction that has to be solved with AI will end up being played out via like climate change and growth. The uh, the the data centers that are you know the data centers that house like the servers that AI runs off of, that like has the computing power that AI needs. That at some point they will just be too um, environmentally unfriendly and then therefore costly to keep open. So, but that's like a situation of collapse, not a situation of collective action. So, I think it's just more.
Right.
That is a lot of pessimism. I think literally collective action is like the only way we can get anywhere in the short term. That might open up like sort of new vistas of struggle or whatever cool leftist phrase you might want to use. But there has to be like a crack made before you can kind of confront the rest of it or collapse. I think that's it. Sorry, that sucks.
Well, there you have it, folks. If you don't like demons, you got to organize against them, and I guess we got to start now. I mean, that's really what churches are, right? They're organized spaces against demons. So we just need to take that out into the world.
That sounds like a good plan. Your churches and trade unions shaking hand meme, organizing against demons. I think that's great.
Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon to continue getting real podcasts made by real people, not algorithmically decided, hardly decided at all in advance. Nobody knows what's going to happen when we start talking, not even us. You can support that effort on patreon.com/the Magnificast. You can also get in our Discord where lots of people are talking about all kinds of stuff. People are talking about left-wing approaches to hiking and bodybuilding and other things today. All very fun stuff that goes on in there. Our music is non-algorithmically created by Amari Armstrong, and the outro is by The Illogical Spoon, and we'll see you next week.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early.